On the Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV was released on March 18th, 2024 as a 4-part documentary series featuring what happened on the sets of Nickelodeon during the time that Dan Schneider was the residing producer on their top shows. The 5th part of the documentary came out on April 7th, 2024 called Breaking the Silence, where multiple cast members were interviewed by Soledad O'Brien and got to share their stories a little bit more. I really did think that the interview was going to go a lot deeper than it did, but she did get to talk to Drake Bell and a few of the other cast members of All That. There was no one from any of the more recent shows during the mid-2000s, and that also leaves questions for us to say, how do they feel? Ariana Grande is one of the biggest stars from Nickelodeon, and she, from what I understand, has not commented on what has happened. She's recently released a new album, and I wonder if this is all bringing up very valid and difficult emotions that may or may not be something she really wants to talk about. And if there are interviews, please let me know down below, but it seems to be that some of these stars got out and were able to move on, and some of the ones who decided to participate in the documentary felt that this was the time for them to share their story, and Drake Bell was one of them. It was odd that he had to apologize for other people, and people were saying that Josh Peck wasn't there for him, who was his co-star on Drake and Josh, and it just felt so unfair that he had to acknowledge that he did and that he is dealing with it behind the scenes on his own personal way with the cast member that he spent many years with. So it really does beg the question of how much we actually even know about what's going on, and can we really offer our own opinions and advice on it, and to say this is what they should have been doing or this is what they shouldn't have. And do we have a better grip on what we should do with child acting nowadays? Around the time that these shows were really popular in the mid-2000s, mid-2010s, YouTube was also taking hold. And there are many child actors in that sense that exist on YouTube, and have we been able to protect those kids in that space? And I do wonder if we will have a documentary series that investigates that as well, that there is other ways that children during this technology boom have been forced to grow up in ways that they probably shouldn't have. And that's not necessarily anything that the documentary went into, but it is questions that came up for me as they were saying, we didn't protect these kids on these shows, but are we able to protect kids nowadays with technology so accessible and there being a very clear gap in what children know when using technology versus what adults know? So is there a way to protect kids when you don't know what's going on and you don't know how the technology works? They're all questions that don't have easy answers, but should be talked about in a space where this is happening. Children are very much being part of all of these shows. And I even recently, today, just saw a video of a child actor from Game of Thrones who's like, I know everything that happened on the show, and she's like, I'm very well aware of the birds and the bees, like I grew up on Game of Thrones. And it's just an interesting conversation that she had, and I do wonder if there will be more series for this Quiet on the Set where it investigates what happened on these other sets, and if it was bad, if it was worse, if there's something that we can do for them now. Drake Bell shared a bit more about his story. He just recently came out with a music video, I Can Relate, that alludes to what happened to him as a child and how he grew through that, and it is quite the story to hear, and I do hope that he's getting through it. And it was just very interesting to watch all of these interviews, because I have had the privilege of being able to go to different conferences and watch people interview, and sometimes it feels as if there's a human element that's missing. And I wonder if that's just how we feel, being able to see people in a very different light with YouTube, and being able to get into the unmanicured version of people and not have the production as the news has always had, where everything was manicured and everything was pre-decided and all these questions are just read. Is there a different way of approaching these interviews and these interview styles? And I don't know if any of you have watched it, but it felt almost cold. And I don't know if that's just how I felt about it or if that's really how it came across. But the questions that were asked of all of these actors didn't seem quite as hard-hitting or as acknowledging what they've been through in the light that I necessarily wanted to see. I wanted to really understand what breaking the silence meant for them, and how that is continuing to be something that is carried through their everyday, and what the actual behind the scenes of growing up on center stage like that and having to figure out your life. What Drake shared in the documentary series and what he's going through, it just seems that there's so much to be learned from him and that he is now willing to share, and I do appreciate that. I know he also has a YouTube channel where he shares as well, so it's unfair that he went through that, and it does look like he's making the best out of it. But there's other stars that were on Nickelodeon that we didn't get any answers from, like Amanda Bynes or Ariana Grande, who seems to have really come out of what happened with her in a different way than most people have. And I don't know if she's ever truly commented on it or if this is something she just wants to move on. And she's been through a lot of things in her own life too, and it's hard to cast this judgment over people when we don't know the full story, and yet that is exactly what people were doing. Drake went on record to say that Josh, who was his former cast member on Drake and Josh, did reach out to him, and that people shouldn't be giving him hate, and he almost had to apologize for it not being public. And it just goes to show that there is so much that we don't know about what's going on behind the scenes, and him deciding to share, in a way, he opened himself up for more judgment or more scrutiny, and of course a lot of sympathy and a lot of empathy. And it is important for us who grew up watching this show to understand, like, this is what was going on, and though we really enjoyed it, there was dark parts of everything that was going on. And at one point they did ask one of the actors from All That, did you enjoy your time? Was there a time that you liked being there? And you know, it's mixed feelings. Of course they enjoyed their jobs, they got to be around other kids, and they did have fun. There was just also this dark undertone of forced sexual situations and racism that was happening on the shows. And it was interesting that during this interview that they also had Dan Schneider's response to what was going on, which came after Drake Bell sharing that Dan was there for him and was the only one of the producers that was. And he doesn't offer more than that, and he can't negate anything that happened to anyone else. He only has his own story to share, which was an important point to be made, and to say that we don't know what happened. We don't know anything more than they're willing to share, and it's been many years since then. There's definitely things that they work through on their own, and that things that we'll never know. So there has to be this acceptance that breaking the silence doesn't mean that everything is released to us and we get to now take our red pens and judge it. We just get to look into a world that we only had one perspective of. And they had a few cast members from All That. One of the members basically reunited with his mom during the filming of the documentary. So they really hadn't talked for many years, and they were really just able to see why the other acted the way that they did. He was eventually let go from the show, and he blamed his mom, and throughout the filming of the documentary they were able to reunite, which is also a nice story to see. And it really does shine a light on the dynamics that exist within the reality of filming a TV show. There is a lot of pressure on the children, there's a lot of pressure on the parents, and especially if this is their biggest form of income, these children are scared to say anything. And many people didn't share it within this documentary. There was only 2 producers who were willing to go on record during the filming of the documentary, and there was only a few stars of the show who wanted to share their story and who felt that they could. And it brings up these questions of, can we really expect people to be an advocate for something that was really hard, and should they be? And I don't think that they need to do that for anyone other than themselves if they feel like that's the right thing, but also if they feel like it's not, that's okay too, because it's not easy to ask something of someone like that. And another thing that was really put sharply into perspective was the way the interviews happened. It felt almost like disassociating from an emotional aspect of what was going on. Now, I don't know if that's just necessarily this person's interview style or this is just standard in the industry. I really thought it was going to be more emotional and opening up more of how this really did affect them, and the fact that these children weren't offered therapy, and the emotional impact as well as the psychological of what they went through. And there really wasn't the opening of that. It was more so just sharing a little bit more. So the documentary series investigates a great deal and does share a lot. I know many people are choosing not to watch it because of how difficult it is to reconcile that this is a show that I cared about for so long, or this was a part of my childhood, and now I need to see it from a different perspective. And I completely understand it, not wanting to, but the importance of it is just there, and it needs to be shared and needs to be talked about. And what goes on behind the scenes of not just the Hollywood machine, but in every place that we go to, needs to be something that we are becoming more aware of, and are able to create that transparency for ourselves, and to realize that the people who didn't stand up for these children were just adding to the pain of these children, and that they were put in a room where the adults were supposed to protect them and they didn't. And that is really how the documentary series opens. It's the children suffered at the hands of the adults who were supposed to protect them, and it is a dark place in this world where a lot of children are being left in the dark and aren't being protected the way that they should. And hopefully this is just the first step into this narrative. They also mentioned how the person that abused Drake went on to work on Disney Channel, and I do hope to see opening of that narrative and to see if Disney is next on this series. And I hope that it doesn't end here, that we get to continue this conversation and to really look at the reality of what's going on. And I do wonder that if YouTube is allowing people to get a better view into the world of these celebrities, to show us that they are just human and that they aren't people that exist on a screen behind a camera. They are real people who are actually affected by what's going on. And the documentary did a good job of humanizing them. And I think the interview ironically did it by not doing it. I wanted to see the emotional aspect and the consoling what happened, but there really wasn't that. It was very removed, and I do wonder if that is just the old way of looking at interviews and connecting to people really going away. And I am a person that engages with YouTube a great deal and gets to see an unmanicured version of people when they post these videos. And of course, right, I don't exactly know if this is someone's personality or not, but you feel a more emotional connection to them. And I do hope that we are transitioning to that in the world that we are living in today, and are more willing to have these conversations. So getting to see that stark difference was really important. And if you do watch Breaking the Silence, let me know what you think about it, because I wanted more from it than we really got. And I do hope that you watch the other 4 parts of the documentary. I watched it all in one go. It's a lot to watch at once, but it's really important. I did go into a deeper dive of the other 4 parts in another video, which you can also check out. But this conversation is important, and it is one that needs to continue to happen, and to put the people who are hurt by these industries at the forefront, and to also give them the space and the grace to say, you get to heal and to transform and to change the way that you can, and that there really can't be any judgment. And we have to stop judging from the perspectives that we have, because they're always limited. We don't know what really truly happened, and we hope that Drake got through it and the other actors got through it, but that is something that they're going to deal with for a very, very long time, and they're doing what they can, and they did what they could with what they had when they had it. And I hope that we can take that with ourselves as well, to not judge our own selves in the past. We didn't know when this was happening, when we were watching the shows. We may not still know, but we can't judge the past. We can learn from it. We can look towards a future from a different lens and hope to do better and do better with what we have, but to give ourselves the grace and all of those other actors who went through a great deal that we'll never really know. That documentary shared a good amount, but we'll never actually know. And that's hard. And if it puts your childhood in a different perspective, I think that's important too, for us to be able to see the reality of what was going on many years later. And there was a revealing of what happened to Drake Bell as it was happening, but it was almost brushed under the rug. And now that we're older, we can look into it and understand it from a different point of view. Hope you watched the 4-part documentary series. If you did watch Breaking the Silence, again, let me know what you thought. I thought it was a little cold and not as informative as I would have liked it to be, but glad that they did it and glad they made the documentary. It's not an easy one, and there's a lot to learn from it, but I will see you soon. Thanks, guys.